Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burlyites. This pod is a real treat for all you data nerds. With us today is pollster, data scientist, company founder, former Herle protégé, and proud daughter of Humboldt, Saskatchewan Kyla Ronellenfitsch. I mean, what can I tell you about Kyla, the overachiever? Started her career with me at the Gandalf Group. I think she was about 11 at the time, and ended up leading the research for the Ontario Liberal Party during the 2018 election. A bit of a tough gig, that one, but a learning experience, that's for sure. Kyla's been dividing her time between Canada and the US for the past few years. In 2021, she founded her own full-service polling firm, Relay Strategies, based in Ottawa. She also consults with Change Research out of San Francisco on thought leadership and product development. Kyla holds a Master of Science in Analytics from the University of Chicago and a Master of Political Management from Carleton. And she's the first alumnus of that latter program to return as an instructor. So today we're taking a deep dive into a fresh qual and quant study from Kyla. She's explored attitudes about Trudeau as Prime Minister. Just exactly how bad is it out there for him? What do people think of Poilievre? What difference might a change in Liberal leadership make? And what would people be looking for in any new Liberal leader? Kyla, exciting topic, and it's great to have you on the Herle Burly. It's a real thrill, I must say.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And I think you've already aired. You said a former Herle protege. I like to think that it continues. But this is really exciting for me. And looking forward to it.
Excellent. Hey, you grew up in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, home of great Liberals like Otto Lang and Bruce Ogilvie, but that was quite a while ago. It's not really a Liberal place now. How did you end up identifying as a Liberal?
Oh, God. Process of elimination, but I'm very much an original Trudeau Liberal. So, I turned into a charter nerd.
You mean Pierre Trudeau Liberal?
Yes. Starting with, just kind of a big charter Liberal, and that was the starting point. And couldn't be a conservative. Didn't fit with the NDP. The Liberals had to be home.
Here we go. Tell me a little bit about Relay and what it does.
Yeah. So we're a full service polling firm, but we really started as a qual shop. As I was finishing my Master's of Science and Analytics at U Chicago, which is a data science program, I felt like I missed qualitative research, which is such a bummer when you've spent, American money on a hard quant degree. But I felt like the way that we were doing qual was very clunky and didn't make any sense to me. So I actually invented a new methodology. So we started by doing qualitative research through text message. And that's actually a methodology that has been adopted by Change Research. So I provided in both Canada and the US. And we actually just recently won an award for best new research methodology method. So it's exciting, but you can't have qual without quant, and a lot of what we're going to talk about today is survey results with some IDI results mixed in.
Right. IDI, you're now getting into jargon. IDI.
In-depth interviews. So conversations that I had with the target audience that we're going to talk about today. Video interviews where you get to have some one-on-one time and really understand their thought process, how their perceptions have evolved over the past few years. And it really helps fill in the gap for the data. It's like, we spend all this time looking at spreadsheets. It's like the sentiments in between the rows of an Excel spreadsheet. It's really kind of gives you all the flavor and the texture.
Yeah, exactly. Very useful. Okay, so let's get into it. What prompted you to do this research? What questions were you trying to answer?
Yeah, I really approach this research as a Liberal. I feel like the number one question in Canadian politics right now is what is happening with Justin Trudeau's leadership? Is he going to stay, or is he going to resign and have someone else take a shot? I think what I see from the party and what I feel is that Pierre Poilievre is in large part kind of, I don't want to say existential, is a little dramatic, but I think is a serious threat to the country and a lot of the progress that has been made. And so I kind of approached it from that, like, what is the smartest move for the party moving forward? Not necessarily for Justin Trudeau himself, but for the party brand, and what could that possibly look like in either scenario? Because I want to be very clear, they are both risks. Justin Trudeau staying is a risk. It has its own different types of risks, and selecting a new leader is a different suite of risks, and both have potential upsides, both have potential downsides.
Okay, so we'll get into all that detail. Let's start with what you learned about what Canadians think about Justin Trudeau. And I guess fundamentally to your question, does he have the makings of a comeback? And we actually have some data that we can put up on the screen here.
Yeah. And as we're getting the data up, I can also speak a little bit, just kind of put the poll in a bit of context and perspective. So I fielded this a couple weeks after the budget. I wanted to give some time for the dust to settle and see if attitudes had moved. I think a big part of the party strategy is doing policy that is very directed in focus at specific audiences that they hope to convert. And I wanted to see if there was any evidence of that happening. So I really looked at kind of the policy strengths or any movement there, as well as his personal brand. And we won't really go into the horse race, but also to kind of put it into context, I found the exact same thing that other pollsters are finding, which is the Liberals down about 20 points from the Conservatives. And that, as we know, that trend line has been holding. So I think that there's a lot of consistencies that I see from other pollsters, but a lot of data here that I think we've not had a chance to look into just yet. So when it comes to impressions of Justin Trudeau, I found, as you know, when I was working at the Gandalf Group, when I was a very fresh green pollster, we worked on the 2015 campaign. And I was at that point in time, I was a note taker. I was observing as many focus groups as I could to try and understand, how does this whole game work? And what I saw at that point in time were a unpacking of Justin Trudeau's strengths and weaknesses. I think that we can, I assume all your podcast listeners are political junkies. They recall the Just Not Ready ads very clearly, as well as some of the ads that the Liberals had put out to bolster Trudeau's brand attributes. But I think what we see in this data today, this moment in time, is the through line to that original point in time. I think of our views of our party leaders kind of like the same as a romantic relationship to a certain extent. You have strengths, you have weaknesses, and in the beginning, you will maybe like downplay the things that maybe cause you pause because you want to see all of the good. And at the end, you break up because of those original characteristics. That is where we are with Justin Trudeau. So I had asked a question. I gave respondents 24 different attributes, and these were positive, they were negative, they were neutral, kind of a mixture in between. And I asked them, which words would you use to describe Justin Trudeau? The top words for him are, one, all negative. And at the very top of the list is poor judgment, a very kind of OG characteristic, an original line of attack from Stephen Harper. After that, it's arrogant, unethical, dangerous, condescending, divisive. This kind of, bucket of characteristics that I would say are in kind of the competency and tone buckets, I guess. And what is really notable is just how much people don't want to attribute positive attributes to him at all. His top strength is that he's well-intentioned. 19% of Canadians would use that word words to describe him. But, smart, personable, likable, hardworking, qualified, all things that were strengths, were brand attributes, were reason to believe in him in 2015 and later, are no longer things that people want to see. Another example of this is the characteristic experienced. Just 12% of voters want to say that that's the case, when obviously, factually, it is correct. He is experienced at being prime minister. So I think that's kind of. I was going to
ask you about that, Kyla. Let's just, and I don't know how much I want to go down your romantic relationship metaphor, but tell me how this works. I mean, I looked at this and I'm saying, there are things on here that he, to my eye, evidently is that people are unprepared to concede to him, right? Personable, likable, energetic. He's energetic, isn't he?
Yeah, I think it goes back to they just want to give him credit, and that's a really tough position to be in. So even when you are doing good things, doing things that people like, for example, the budget, which all of my polling and other shows that it didn't move the dial, even though people like the individual elements of the budget. It's just 15% of Canadians that said that it improved their opinion in any sort of way. So I think it's just you've sort of decided and you don't want to give credit. Just they are not in the mood.
Interesting a side tour on the budget, because you did a word cloud of what people told you about the budget.
Yeah.
And to my eye, all the things that the government would have wanted people to take from the budget were in the word cloud. Capital gains tax, housing, social spending. So people got it. And you're right. When you test all those individual things, they like them. But overwhelmingly, people said the budget made them feel worse about the government. So this is a psychological thing, no longer a rational thing, right?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think one, there were some tonal elements. Like if you looked at the people that were bringing up capital gains tax, it was people that were pissed about it for the most part. It wasn't people that had heard about it who were like, yeah, they're sticking it to the rich. That's great. It's more so it's split into who's paying attention to it. But there were definitely mentions related to housing, a lot though related to spending and that they're spending left, right, and center kind of type feeling.
Right. So that slide that we were looking at of Trudeau's attributes, it feels to me like there's no way to not consider him a drag on the party when even at the party's extremely low position of, say, 23% in the polls, 24% in the polls, there are many fewer people than that prepared to grant him any favorable attribute.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Currently, the favorability of the party is higher than it is for Justin Trudeau himself, which I think if you think of any point in the past 10 years, feels impossible to imagine. He has always been such an attribute, such a boost for the party.
Right. Half of Canadians, you pointed this out, think he has poor judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from?
One, I think that it's a concern that existed, and that's why it resonates. I think that, I think it's a decade's worth of examples. It feeds into kind of that frame and that understanding. I think a lot of it is like, it's India, it's holidays, it's verbal slip-ups, it's all of those kinds of things. And I think that the cost of living situation has made it that much worse, because it was one thing to get us through. It was really interesting to hear people say in the qualitative portion to talk about how well he managed COVID, how well he managed Donald Trump, like the Trudeau of prior, which were obviously very difficult dynamics to manage, but he, in their eyes, just doesn't seem capable of managing this crisis, which is the cost of living crisis.
Right. And unethical, is that justifications? I mean, I don't think it's been a tremendously ethically scarred government. I've certainly seen worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I don't know that people, attribute ethics to that many politicians. So there is a part of that is like, when we, in a minute, go and look at Pierre Poilievre's numbers, right, that's a through line as well. They are politicians. People generally don't like politicians. So I think that there's always kind of that unethical part that is an assumption. And as you have power and carry the purse, things pop up that feed that frame.
Last week, I said you can tell a lot about what a company values by where they make their capital expenditure investments. Apropos of that, this week we're going to spend some quality time on a Canadian farm. Makes the Herle heart swell just a little. Our presenting sponsor's agricultural division is the aptly named TELUS Ag. They've made Canadian farming a priority investment for years now. Newly seeded, an initiative called TELUS Connected Worker Solutions, which improves farm worker safety. Farms can be vast, far-flung places. My family worked a 640-acre wheat farm outside of Prelate, Saskatchewan. Threshers and combines were an ongoing and potentially dangerous reality. TELUS has developed real-time technology that monitors workers in the field, their precise location and activities, alone or on a team, and connects them instantly to emergency services. TELUS Ag has also launched a suite of services to help with the growth and well-being of livestock. Online animal record management made easier and more efficient. Daily data collection, real-time access to health information, and customizable reports to optimize the health of cattle. Precision strategies for nutrition, built by the TELUS Calf Grower Feeding Program, plus other tools that improve the well-being of the herd and maximize economic potential. Herle Burlyites, these are the investments TELUS makes in how we live and learn, work, more easily access our health care, and thrive. The human outcomes. They want to keep making them. So here's the crux. Regulatory conditions play a big part in what they can get done. As the government considers a new wholesale regime, TELUS believes that the way forward is a tailored approach that recognizes different regional truths. Farms are not the city. Investments cost more in remote areas. The competitive landscape in all markets is not the same. More on all of this next week. So what do you see here? If you were advising him and he said to you, I'm running, like this is just it. I'm not going to let Poilievre win. This is not how I'm going out. There's too much on the line. I'm running. Mm-hmm. What do you see that you could work with?
Yeah, I think they need to find opportunities to go against type. I think that people see him as his communication style as kind of going around the point. Like he will, go on beautiful conversations about our values and what we are trying to do. And he'll kind of like skirt around the point. I think tightening up his communications, getting a little bit more direct and to the point. But I think it's also demonstration of economic competence and really doubling down on that. I think of these examples in the past of him actually being able to really shock people by having mastery of the issues, which I think that we know from anyone that has had conversations, sits in meetings with him, that he is deeply competent. He is aware of what is going on, but he, for whatever reason, there's always been that gap in how they wanted to communicate, which is very values focused. And I don't think we're in a values focused era. We're in a policy, what are we going to do? What are we going to solve kind of moment in time? And I think it's figuring that out and also being cognizant of what some of these deficits are and thinking that through when we are contrasting with Pierre Poilievre. I don't know that a lot of this strategy of like an immediate pivot and immediate contrast is working in the way that they want.
You know, it's so interesting how they've done that, or he's done that, or whoever is, to his own reputation, because everybody I know who meets him for the first time is completely surprised by how together he is, how smart he is, how much he knows about the issues, all that kind of stuff. And somehow the public communications has totally undercut that side of his personality.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, he was positioned as not Harper. And that was so important and it was so compelling. So Harper was that guy. Harper was the details guy. Harper was a kind of a tight ass. He was boring and he made you feel like you couldn't have nice things, even if you really wanted them. Like he was, I don't know, the buttoned up dad, and it was no fun. Justin Trudeau was fun and he made you feel good and he made you feel very proud to be Canadian. It was all of those things. It was very light and in a good way. I don't mean light as in, soft. I mean light in that he brought levity to the country and that was exciting and people wanted to be involved in that. And that was very fun and people liked seeing us on the world stage. All of those things really resonated. And so I think that they got into a habit of existing within that frame, which was socks and beautiful photos and like a more values-based in Canada, better is always possible, that kind of dynamic. And at a certain point, it switched to, we need to fucking get to business and we need to solve the financial or the affordability crisis. And I don't think that level of seriousness has been I know that from a policy perspective, it's been internalized, but from a communications perspective, I don't think it's been internalized.
When Trudeau was running back in 2014, 2015, you and I saw something that I have never, ever seen with a politician, which is a lot of people hoping that he would be successful.
Yeah.
Right? Not sure that he would be, but wanting him to be, rooting for him to be. And that was one of the reasons why the Harper ads didn't have as much traction as they might have, because people didn't want that avenue to be closed down so quickly. They wanted to see more from Trudeau. They could have agreed with the Harper ads that at that moment he's not ready, but could he get ready? So there was this partisanship, this team thing with him that I've never, ever seen with a politician. Where'd that go?
One, I think that it did have a tail. I think his favorability increased after he was elected. He had a very long honeymoon period. I think that people held on to that for a surprising amount of time. I remember doing polling a year after, and people were still discussing him in the same terms. Like, I think that he has the correct values. Maybe it's too early, but I think he will get there, all of those kinds of things. And I guess eventually you can't exist in that space forever, of course, at a certain point.
Right.
Remember that you are, in fact, the government. You are not their buddy, or their son, or whatever the dynamic might be. And I think that there's an expectation of delivery, and his strengths previously were on management of these specific crises, but I don't know that he's ever been perceived as a strong manager of the totality.
Right. Okay, so we have another graph for what I'm going to bring up now, which is scary. So here's my theory, based on my attempts to re-elect late-term governments, or my observations of other late-term governments trying to get reelected, is that one of the essential components is that the alternative has to be unacceptable, almost disqualified. That people want change, and if change seems reasonable, they'll take it. So the change has to seem unreasonable for you to win. And this graph tells us that is completely inverted from what the Liberals needed to be. Is that not true?
Yeah. So, I mean, if I was to look at what I think the Trudeau Liberal strategy is, it's move policy, make Pierre Poilievre unacceptable. So I wanted to test that exact proposition. So the question is, do you agree or disagree? Pierre Poilievre represents a scary type of politics, and does Justin Trudeau represent a scary type of politics? What's so important to remember about Pierre Poilievre is he is polarizing. There are relatively equal portions of people that have really positive impressions of him and people that have really negative perceptions. So if we look at strong agreement, so people that will be motivated, it's 27% strongly agree that he represents a scary type of politics. 30% strongly disagree with that idea. If you look at Trudeau, 42% strongly agree with that proposition. 6 in 10 Canadians agree that he represents a scary type of politics. I think that if you are a Liberal, that is paradigm shattering. When I looked at this data, I can't tell you the number of times that I checked, verified, looked again, because it didn't seem possible. I could understand how you become jaded, you decided you don't like the government, they might have these weaknesses and limitations that you feel like they have, but scary, I don't understand that. But on this specific proposition, which is the fundamental point of contrast that the government wants, they're losing. So if you are trying to say this guy over here is bringing us in a scary direction, it holds no weight, because people think that you are holding, or that you are actually the person that is bringing us into a scary direction. And yeah, I would sit on this data for a long time.
There's more risk with staying with the incumbent than there is with them. Can I take you back to, up, maybe up 30,000 feet to the mentality of Canadians right now? So before the 2016 election that Trump won, there was a data point in a Washington Post survey that I didn't pay enough attention to. And they asked people whether they would prefer a president who would be a reliable and competent administrator of the status quo, or whether they would prefer a president who would bring great change to America, even if they didn't know what that change would be. And a majority of Americans in 2016 chose the "I would choose great change, even if unknown" option. And that should have been a signal of openness to Trump, to us. Similarly, in the United States, I'm seeing similar data right now about how much change is required, and therefore how safe the status quo is. So is this somewhat a reflection, not just of the judgment of Poilievre and Trudeau being dangerous or scary, but the desire for change in the country?
Well, I think that what is scary right now is not what the government thinks is scary. What is scary is that people can't afford to live. And I think that we often talk about it as the affordability crisis as just a number or an item on a list. So it's, the affordability,
healthcare, housing,
healthcare, all of these things. But you live in affordability every single day. If I was to draw a comparison to the Kathleen Wynne government, which we know cost of hydro, huge consideration. You pay your hydro bill once a month, so it might really piss you off and you might be thinking of it throughout the month, but it's every transaction that you make right now. And I think people are genuinely so afraid and just sitting in their anxiety, and that is scary. So whereas I think what maybe, I don't know, progressives, what liberals might think of is the shape of our politics and that being scary. So the tone issues, extremism, violence,
journalists,
all those kinds of things. Pardon?
He doesn't respect journalists.
Yeah, the flouting of norms, all of that kind of stuff is a scary slippage, which I would agree with, but it's in people's minds. Those things are maybe they would resonate in better times, but they are only sitting in this thing. And I think that is so deeply important. For the Canadian-American contrast, I think that we are experiencing our own flavor. I think that they are very much if Donald Trump is appealing to you, you kind of want things to burn. You think things are so horrific that everything needs to be shaken up. The system is broken, and you have a version of that on the left, but it's not quite in the same way. In Canada, I don't think that's it. I don't think it's set everything on fire, but I do think that a big part of the appeal of Pierre Poilievre is how certain he is. If I was to describe the desire for, like, the leadership traits that we were looking for in 2015, I think was to be inspired. The leadership traits that we're looking for right now are to be led, for someone to tell us what we need to do and where we need to go. And that is what Pierre Poilievre does. It was really astounding to hear people talk about he's a good talker, he's smart, he has direction, he knows what he's going to get done. One participant talked about him as, when he talks, he speaks on one issue, which means he's not bullshitting you. He knows exactly what he's talking about. He has command of the issue and he's talking through it. And because he's so forceful, people think that he has to know what the fuck he's talking about. And that's a contrast to Justin Trudeau. He's a little bit more soft and roundabout, and that might have appealed at one point, and people have kind of lost patience.
Okay. That's an interesting contrast. You don't think we're in a burn it down phase?
No, I don't, but I do think it's, let's fucking go, like, let's move and let's make some changes.
Right. Safety is one of those subjects that tends not to excite, principally because success involves things not happening. But just about nothing is more important. Our sponsor, CN, runs a network that spans North America, from the east coast of Canada to the Pacific and down the Mississippi to the Gulf Coast. Its tracks and trains run through thousands of communities, and the duty of rolling safely and smoothly through those cities and towns is absolute. Early in June, during Safety Week, special CN trains will make a series of whistle stops across the railway's network. Teams of safety experts will meet local leaders, talk safety, celebrate employees who have logged 30 injury-free years, recognize heroic acts, and simply and plainly explain how to prevent injuries, accidents, and disasters. Hint, if you see a train coming, for heaven's sake, stay off the tracks. And CN is putting serious muscle into disaster relief. Earlier this month, the railway announced a pledge of $10 million over 10 years across its network. Climate change has brought increasingly extreme weather in recent years. Wildfire season is well underway. Count on seeing forest fire smoke again over major cities this year. So apart from its extensive efforts to prevent and contain fires, and I'll have more on that as the summer progresses, the railway is setting aside money for emergency response, community rebuilding, and infrastructure rehabilitation. The world is changing, folks. We have to adapt. That will cost money, and CN is stepping up. So let's talk about Poilievre for a few minutes.
Yeah.
People know a lot less about him, or are likely to know less about him than they know about Trudeau. So then the percentage of people that would attribute a characteristic to him is less than it was for Trudeau in many instances. Nonetheless, there is a profile forming. And what is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if, you can show it. So again, going back to Pierre Poilievre, perceptions of him are polarized. There are people that are seeing the good. There are people that are seeing the bad. For people that are seeing the good, they're seeing a guy who is smart, hardworking, qualified, has family values, well-intentioned, cares about people like you. It is primarily a competence formulation. And again, very much as a contrast to Justin Trudeau in the open-endeds. When we dig into that, a lot of the sentiment is he's a good talker. He has common sense. He tells it like it is. Those kinds of attributes that convey confidence and competence. On the negative, though, as a liberal, as someone who sees these attributes myself, this is the combination that resonates with me personally. But and this exists to equal degree with the people that see the positive. They see him as arrogant, dangerous, risky would be the top words. There's also one really interesting attribute and that's aggressive, is situated quite highly. And I think that can be in the eye of the beholder. I think that there can be aggressive good, there can be aggressive fighter standing up against the government. There's that type of aggressive. And then there's aggressive, pushy asshole. And, that might be collecting a combination. I think given where it stacks up on these other attributes, I think it's probably in the positive. But this is the formulation, and I think this is what we have to work with, both in terms of what we're leveraging, the attributes that we are leveraging when we are attacking him, but also keeping in mind what his strengths are.
So for somebody that consumes the Ottawa bubble, the national political circle conversations, the notion that he is divisive, being held by only 1 in 5 Canadians, is pretty remarkable to me. And in fact, all those things that liberals kind of counted on being part of the Poilievre persona are really limited to tiny slices of the population, 15% or so. Dangerous, divisive, risky, these are not broadly held views of him in the country.
And views that are held more broadly of Justin Trudeau. Divisive is a higher attribute for Justin Trudeau. So when the Conservatives say you are the one who is divisive, there is some truth to that in terms of perception. Right.
Well, so the two things you pointed out in the top 10 Poilievre attributes that aren't unabashedly positive are aggressive and arrogant.
Mhm.
So how dangerous are those two attributes to him? Because they're emerging. I'm interested in things that are emerging. Like the Liberals have no advertising campaign, so this is not being pushed on anybody. This is not a response to a stimuli. In a sense, this is just what people are picking up, and along with everything else, they're picking up. He's aggressive,
Mhm.
and he's arrogant. With the apple in the yard there. Is that going to matter in this environment at all? Is there anything you can do with that?
I think that there are contexts where it can matter. I think that there's a lane certainly on these attributes. When I think of a year, 2 years, 5 years, whenever it is that the amount of shine that is on Pierre Poilievre is off, I really think it'll be in large part because of his demeanor. These attributes that are high ranked now that people are seeing, I think that that'll expand. It's just a matter of when and how and exactly what that looks like. But there are different lanes to how you focus on this. There can be, I personally think that one avenue that I would really want to explore is that this guy doesn't fucking shut up and he is annoying. And I think that there's a specific, I would really be looking for opportunities to let this sink with women, because I think that this is familiar. This is the guy, I'll choose a personal example. This is the guy in like your poli-sci class who won't stop interrupting every woman that he talks to and just thinks that he knows it all and is annoying and obnoxious. I think that there's a part of that. I think what we've really tried to lean into, and there's also a humor to that. That's something that is often downplayed in our political communications, is just how like Donald Trump is just a weird guy. This is kind of funny in a way. All of these kinds of things are, I think that there's a soft way to sort of make fun of it that doesn't need to be, he is the boogeyman, he's so scary, he's so arrogant, or he's so aggressive, or whatever. It can be like, I can't stand this guy for another minute. And I would be looking for specifically opportunities to land that message with women. Where I think they would have more traction with it is finding instances where he is like that, but not as a contrast to Justin Trudeau. Because in the qualitative component, when I would show people clips that I thought were actually pretty bad clips for Pierre Poilievre and decent clips for Justin Trudeau. For example, I gave them a clip from the House of Commons where Pierre Poilievre basically called Justin Trudeau a racist, told him that he was in racist garb as many times as, well, too many times to remember, whatever the way that they frame it. And then Justin Trudeau came back and said, well, you are associating with white supremacists, essentially. I looked at that and I thought, this is a really sharp and ugly exchange for Pierre Poilievre. And when I would show it to people, to be clear, I guess I never clarified this earlier, I spoke exclusively to people that we would hope to get to vote Liberal, so people that would be persuadable. They looked at it and they saw politics as usual. They're both name calling. They're both participating in this activity. People, again, hate politics and they think that this is how they behave and they think that this is normal. And Justin Trudeau is the prime minister and he's not seen as a vulnerable person. I think I would be looking for opportunities of him speaking to women like this, whether that's female reporters, colleagues, those kinds of dynamics. I would really be looking for or regular citizen, like people that he is punching down on. That would be the kind of stuff that I would be clipping to kind of feed that frame.
Right. So, I mean, the Conservatives are at 43 points.
Mm-hmm.
And the highest ranking attribute that Poilievre got on anything was 26 points.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's an increasing tendency on the part of a lot of people, including myself, to give Poilievre credit for where the Conservatives are at right now. But this research would indicate that there's a gap between impressions of him and impressions of the party that's potentially exploitable still.
Certainly. I think, the data show that the Conservative Party has a better reputation than Pierre Poilievre, just like the Liberal Party has a better reputation than Justin Trudeau. This is not always the dynamic at all. It's on an enormous gap, but he does have lower favorables than the party. There's they're the natural alternative. If people don't want to vote for Justin Trudeau, a lot of people just immediately go to the Conservatives. Some will, of course, look at the NDP, but I think they have their own challenges in terms of having a leader that's been around for a while. People also feel exposed to him and they are familiar. They kind of know the scenario. So Pierre Poilievre is the new guy. A lot of it is movement to him purely based off of that calculus. And there are inherent brand strengths for the Conservative Party that exist at any point in time. It doesn't matter who's leading, which is on the economy. And we are in an economy zone. People are looking for the number one issue. 78% of voters said that the cost of living was a concern as they think about how they're going to vote in the next election. It was even, I think, 10 or 15 points higher than healthcare, which is usually number one. It is the top issue.
The other emerging issue that plays well into their hands is crime, of course, right?
Of course. Mm-hmm.
And as that issue gets more prominent, that's also a good issue for them to be fighting on. So do you see in here the makings of a disqualifying critique of Poilievre? Are the elements there right now? Is there something to build on, or do you have to create it out of whole cloth? And if there's something there to build on, what are those elements?
There's something for the party to build on, for sure. There is the items that I mentioned related to demeanor. I do think that is important, and figuring out exactly what that angle and how to feed that frame is really critical. And there's part here that isn't necessarily in this study, but we have to figure out the policy contrast. We can't just give them policy. They can't be the commanders of the economic frame. They can't be they can't be defining the policy paradigm. So we have to figure out an economic message. What is this point of contrast? This is the crisis that we're facing. How does his approach contrast with ours? How would this look very different? I don't think that voters are necessarily seeing what that is, but I also don't think that they know enough about Pierre Poilievre to think that they know what his economic agenda is. It's just competence. That's the agenda. It's, I know what I'm going to do. I say what I'm going to do and I do it. It's that kind of feeling. And they just assume, he's a conservative and he's a smart guy. He will get there. And we need to find ways to interject doubt into that dynamic, because if we can't erode at that core competency kind of strength, we're fucked. I don't know how else to say it.
When I think back to the negative campaigns that don't work, like, for instance, Ignatieff on Harper in 2011. And it's, I think liberals are susceptible to this. But a lot of it really boiled down to, he's not a nice guy, right? He's kind of mean to people. He doesn't respect journalists or norms of our democracy. So he's anti-democratic and rise up. But doesn't the critique need to lead people to believe that something bad would happen to them, not just to somebody else?
That's where the policy part comes in. It can't just be that this guy's a miserable asshole. That isn't enough. So what? You could be a miserable asshole for me. That's fine. You can be a fighter for me. It's again back to that kind of aggressive attribute. It has to matter. I think that we need to find a way to be equals or better on the economy, and then these other attributes start to matter. If it's, I can't listen to this guy for 4 years, I simply could not imagine voting for him, which is kind of where Ignatieff was. People just didn't like him. It wasn't, from my memory, it wasn't that, oh, he's going to do scary things for this country. It was, I can't tolerate that fucking guy. And that's where it was. And I think that we could get to that position with Pierre Poilievre. There are enough centrist, progressive people that are not natural conservatives necessarily in the country that, I think that the Liberal parties still has a reason to exist. It still has an appeal. It's just that we need to find our footing on the economy.
Right. Okay. So fun stuff. You got into potential replacements for Trudeau.
Mm-hmm.
Very difficult to do because really only Freeland has much of a public profile, and even she, not that much of a public profile, but some. So how did you do it? Just walk us through the methodology of how you tested the candidates a little bit.
Well, I tested 8 candidates. I think people will want to know who those people are. So Chrystia Freeland, Melanie Joly, Mark Carney, Anita Anand, Francois Philippe Champagne, Mark Miller, Sean Fraser, Dominic LeBlanc. And it is hard to, not that many people vote in leadership races. This isn't necessarily the purpose of this isn't to say who would win in a leadership race. It's a little bit more of who would be interesting to the general public in a general election, who would pique interest. So I took 3 sort of looks at it. One is, who knows who these people are, who has any amount of name recognition, or I also tested their images to see, have you ever seen this person before? Do you recognize them? So there's that look. There's current perceptions of them, so their favorability rating today. And then I provided respondents with the bio for each individual person. I tried to make it as kind of positive as possible, as enticing as possible, to give everyone a fair shake. And I asked them, how exciting does this person seem? So not necessarily, would you vote for them? That's a lot to put on a bio. I'm not that good of a writer. But just trying to understand who had some degree of appeal, and then who would you prefer? Would you rather vote for Justin Trudeau, who you do know well, or this person that you don't know that well and have a little bit of information on? And I gave them that forced choice. So that's kind of the today versus the potential look of each individual candidate.
Okay. So the first thing that you found is that the number of Canadians, the percentage of Canadians that are prepared to consider voting for the Liberal Party in the next election goes up by 14 points if Mr. Trudeau steps down. Mm-hmm. It's not a straight line. There are 20-some% who are going to be interested. There's also about 10% or something that will be less likely to vote Liberal if Mr. Trudeau leaves, but the net gain is 14 points. I think we have a graph on this too, maybe 2 graphs on this. So why don't you walk us through this graph, Kyla?
Sure. So this is our vote pool. So the total number of people that are considering voting to any party. Obviously, before you decide to vote for a candidate, you have to at least have them on your radar. They cannot be disqualified in your mind. So the conservative numbers should, Liberals have a fire lit under their ass. We know that this is incredibly important, but this is jarring. They are almost in majority territory just by base alone. So people that are certain to vote Conservative, that's sitting at 32%. Their total vote pool is north of 60%, which is huge for the Conservatives. If we look at the Liberals...
Can I just stop you there? We used to have a formula that we applied to these numbers, which is that you get all of your certains, you get 80% of your likelies, and you get about a third of your possiblies, right? Mm-hmm. So they could hit 50.
Yeah.
Conservatives could hit 50. Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah. And yeah, so the current vote pool for and I tested, it's the combination of the leader and party. So the vote pool for the Liberal Party led by Justin Trudeau is 38%. 62% say absolutely not. They are certain not to vote for the Liberal Party. That increases, as you said, by 14 points. So the certain nots decline from 62% to 48% if we test just the proposition of another leader. So somebody else, it doesn't like anyone else. And that window opens up. And then we start getting into a little bit more of a normal territory. Our base is pretty depleted. It's only at 11%. And it's the same in both scenarios of people that are certain to vote for us. And as we well know from the Ontario experience and elsewhere, a small base for the Liberal Party is terrifying. Yeah.
Okay. And And then, but the movement's more subtle. And Jill, if you could throw up the next slide, we can take a look at that.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. So 13% of the population would be certain or likely. So pretty strong liberals, no matter what. If it was Justin Trudeau, if it was somebody else, they're liberals. They're going to vote liberal. 10% are loyal to Trudeau. They would be, or more loyal to Trudeau. They would be more likely to vote for Trudeau than another liberal. And when I say more likely, it just means that they're higher up on the ladder. So they could go from certain to vote liberal under Trudeau to only likely or possibly. They just shift within their degree of certainty.
Should I assume that they're New Democrats or Quebecers?
Or more likely with, no, they are mostly voting liberal already. They're pretty.
No, I'm saying if they were to move, they would be more likely to move to the NDP, and they're more likely to be.
Yeah, as you get higher on the commitment for liberals, you would be more likely to go to the NDP. And as we get to these other categories, they're coming a little bit more from the Conservatives. So 7% would be possible no matter what. And then it's 1 in 4 Canadians would be more likely to vote for the Liberals with somebody other than Justin Trudeau. So again, that could be just up the ladder. So possibly with Trudeau, likely with somebody else. A lot of it is coming from people that have written off the Liberals and then move up to maybe they're considering it. They're moving to a possibly.
Right. And this 24% that are more likely to consider voting Liberal if Trudeau's gone. Where are they now? And what kind of people are they?
They're a little bit more likely to be Conservatives, but they are also coming from the NDP. But it's a little bit more, they're a little bit more conservative, and it's also more likely to be men. Our strength for the Liberals, this is consistent, but especially under Trudeau, is among women, and it's that the youngest Canadians, so we tend to perform reasonably well among people under 35, and then seniors, it's that relationship. And when we look at the prospect of someone else, we start to bring in even more young people, but also bringing in more men. But if you roll all these people up, so everyone that throughout the report, I've called them the expanded Liberal vote pool. If we look at that entire group, we have the Liberals are currently getting about 40% of those people, and then they're pulling equally from the NDP and the Conservatives. So this is really interesting, and it's sort of the mythology of what we think of for the Liberal Party. We think we're the center, and we pull from the Conservatives, and we pull from the Liberals, and that hasn't been true for the past decade. But because the Conservatives are so popular right now, that actually kind of is the dynamic that we're in. I don't want to overstate what that means for policy imperatives. I don't think that it means that those are Conservatives necessarily. They're people that are currently planning to vote Conservative, but otherwise that probably voted for us in the past.
So what's interesting about this is that male vote. I mean, it's been such a gap in the latter stages of the Trudeau administration. What is it about Trudeau that they like the least?
Well, he's never been their guy. He's not a guy's guy.
Right.
But women loved him. Like he just is a different type of persona. I think that when men were voting for him, he was exciting, and they saw it was change. It was that kind of feeling, whereas women were inspired, and they were seeing a representation of the Canada that they wanted, a feminist Canada, a positive and exciting, all of these kinds of things. I think those items have always been a little bit ick to men, where they actually don't like that soft, lovey-feely type stuff. I think that it just is.
I've learned it the hard way.
I hate describing it as this because it's so gross, but I think he flouts gender norms in a large way, in a way that I think that our society should move in to a certain extent, like a more fulsome look of masculinity. I don't know, we're kind of off topic, but I think that doesn't necessarily appeal to a lot of male voters.
Right. Okay, so before we get into specific names,
Mhm.
what are people looking for in a new Liberal leader? And I'm specifically interested in two audiences, one of which is the core Liberal vote, because I think that probably most closely approximates the type of people that will actually vote in a leadership race. And then second of all, that increase of those people that increase our vote pool, especially those that come from the Conservatives, because every vote we take from the Conservatives is worth 2 to 1 that we take from the NDP. So we've got to get votes from the Conservatives. So what are those kinds of people looking for? The core Liberals and then people we need to pull from the Conservatives.
Okay. I think we have data for that wraps up those two groups, but I think that there are some distinguishing features between them. When we look at the entire vote pool, there are 3 characteristics and 2 of them are in tension with one another. So the one that is just kind of a given, they're fluently bilingual. That's important for prospective Liberal voters. But then we have equal portions that are prioritizing someone who is more economic focused than social policy focused. And then the same portion that would prefer someone who's more social policy focused and economic focused. The more core Liberals are prioritizing the social policy element. And then as we get further down the list, we're pulling from the Conservatives. It's more of an economic framing that they're prioritizing. But aside from that, there are some attributes that are just viewed as important. And I think one that really stands out relative to when we look at the population as a whole, which is an interest in someone who is a woman. 34% of prospective or expanded Liberals would be more likely to vote Liberal with a woman leading the party.
That's actually one of the largest net spreads on this chart, 27 points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And a longtime Liberal is obviously much more resonant if you are a longtime Liberal. Right. But then as we get further away, then you start to see the response to Justin Trudeau being more important. So the biggest negative driver, so that would make you less likely to vote Liberal, would be a close friend or political ally of Justin Trudeau would be the single greatest drag.
It seems to be an even divide on whether or not the person should be from the current cabinet.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think that also has people that are enticed by that are more so Liberals, people that are not are, but I think.
So talk about that. If you're going to grow the vote, which way are you going on that?
On cabinet or not?
Yeah.
I think to a certain extent, it depends on the person, and it goes back to the perceived closeness to the prime minister. So if you've been, side by side, anytime someone has seen you on TV and they think of you as basically Trudeau 2.0, I don't think that's the wisest choice for us to go. I think it's just too easy to paint them with the exact same brush. If it's someone that has a little bit of, or is effective at fostering their own kind of reputation and I don't want to say policy direction, but just feel like they've been driving a specific agenda more so on their own. I think that can be really enticing. And I think we'll see that when we look at the favorabilities of some of the different potential candidates.
Right. And by a 2-to-1 margin, people in this expanded Liberal vote pool want the party to be a centrist party.
Yeah, but it's down the list. But yes. Yeah, you are correct. I think that the priority what is centrist? Centrist is what you want it to mean. Centrist is me. That's what centrism means. It's whatever you hold dear. And I think that it's a very Canadian sentiment to want centrism because it feels like, not too extreme, not too bold in any certain direction. I think that's the appeal of the word centrism. I don't think it's necessarily about policy because centrism moves depending on where we are in that moment in time. So I think what's more clear to me is the prioritization of economic versus social and where that plays out.
Right. Okay. So when you tested actual candidates, what did you find?
I found that these people are not particularly well known, with the exception of Chrystia Freeland. So I just looked at who knows who these people are. So to recognize their image, it's Chrystia Freeland is most recognizable. People are used to seeing her, so 55% recognize her image. Most people recognize her by name, and then it would be Melanie Joly and Anita Anand that would be most recognizable. But if we look at their actual favorables, there isn't really a lot there. People don't tend to have a strong impression of any of them one way or another. Even if they recognize their name, it's kind of, they don't really know. And the exception is Chrystia Freeland. Chrystia Freeland has a very unfavorable rating of 30%, which is headwinds. That's a pretty substantial segment if she was named leader tomorrow.
Is it?
Dudes would have thoughts on the internet, and op-eds would be written, and there would be immediate critical feedback that I think doesn't necessarily exist for some of these other candidates. But we'll get into it. It's a complex story.
Well, let's just stop and talk about her, right? Let's just stop and talk about her, because she's the obvious choice for this job. She had a tremendous reputation coming into public life. She has been the most important minister for the entire life of this government, is the deputy prime minister and the finance minister. And she's a woman, which your data shows that Liberal voters would like if the next Liberal leader was a woman. So she's the obvious front runner, but she's got these high negatives that you're talking about. And my question to you would be, how much of those high negatives are because she's seen as Trudeau's 2IC? So she just gets the Trudeau negatives? And how much of it is people actually making a judgment about Chrystia Freeland?
It's both of those things, I think. It's that they know she's second in command. She's the other Trudeau. Like people have that very tight association with her. And I think there are also demeanor questions for her. When I would do these interviews, people would describe her as smug or really recoiling from her presence. But at the same time, again, like for people that are likely Liberals, she is the front runner. She is liked by, it's very much like through your own lens, you see what you want to see. So if you are kind of more conservative, unlikely to vote Liberal, you might see a lot that you dislike. And if you are a Liberal, you will see a lot that you do like about Chrystia Freeland.
Well, it's a tough thing to figure out, right? Because you don't want to elect the leader that the Conservatives like. You want to elect the leader that people will vote for, right? Mm-hmm. And so the votes of people that we don't care about aren't terribly, the perspectives of people that will never vote Liberal are not terribly germane to this conversation. But the party's only at 23%. It needs to grow its support very substantially. Yeah.
But opinion is not created in a vacuum. People aren't like looking at each individual candidate all by their lonesome, looking at their merits. It's also part of the conversation and the chatter. And if she starts with immediate negative discourse, I think that would be tough. And because of that degree of closeness with Justin Trudeau, I think that there's kind of a lot to work with. And when we look at even among people that are considering voting for us, the most alienating attribute is a close friend or political ally of Justin Trudeau.
So the two names at the top of this list are Freeland and Carney.
Yeah.
Freeland is more exciting to people that are certain to vote Liberal regardless of who the leader is. Mm-hmm. Freeland is way more exciting to people that are going to be less likely to vote Liberal if Trudeau leaves. Mm-hmm. Right? So she'd be more likely to hold those people. Mm-hmm. She's about as exciting to people that are right now just currently thinking about possibly voting for the Liberal Party. But for people that are not currently thinking about voting for the Liberal Party, that might if we changed our leader, now there's a huge gap in favor of Carney. Mm-hmm. Now, nobody knows who Mark Carney is. Mm-hmm. So what are people responding to there?
Yeah, it's the persona of, I don't mean like his mannerisms. Aside from in the qualitative component, most people, like what the state is based off of is an image and a bio. So it's kind of a static setting. And it's that his attributes stack up nicely on what is viewed as a current deficit, which is economic prowess. And that experience feels very relevant. And he's coming from outside of politics. So it's like this expert economist who got us through. Part of the bio I gave was a reference to the 2008 financial crisis, because I think that's a very relevant point. And so he helped us through that crisis that Canadians feel like we did fare comparatively well, and he could be appealing here. And even when I then did test him in the qualitative component, like, he is obviously competent. He seems like a smart man, and that holds some interest.
Right. If you're down on the pack here, you want to run, right? What do you need to be thinking about?
I think you are thinking of points of differentiation and contrast that don't piss off the base. Like, that is the challenge, is what are you bringing that the current government isn't doing? And it's for everyone else, it's a government that you are a part of. So what is kind of your critique, and what would you do differently, and why? How would a government look different with you at the helm? But I think it's finding, you have to find that point of contrast to what we have now, both I think kind of within the membership, like finding that soft line, or that narrow line, like finding exactly what that is. But that is what's required for a general. You have to figure out, why would I continue to vote Liberal, even if it's in the absence of Justin Trudeau? What makes me think that the party still has a reason to form government? So what would change and what would be different? And that's obviously very hard. They're sitting in caucus, they're cabinet ministers, they're part of a decision-making body. So figuring that out is what you need to, that's the task.
So there's a really good podcast out there called Cursive Politics. And there's 4 people on that show, and they're all unanimous that a successful Liberal leader will have taken a shotgun to the carbon tax. Do you have any reason to believe that would be a negative in a leadership race?
In a leadership race? I don't think so. I don't think that no one is voting Liberal because of the carbon tax. Is climate change important to Liberals? Yes. So it's figuring out what would be the pivot. It's not, we're done with this and it'll never be, we're never talking about climate change again. It's figuring out, actually, this is ineffective and is costing people money. We're going to do this instead. Yeah. And that would have to be, I think, pretty inspiring. It actually couldn't be. I don't think it's a central. It's definitely not the focal point of, or should not be the focal point of, the next Liberal campaign. But I think for members, I think that they do still probably want to be inspired on that metric. They don't want to feel like, one, that we've just given it all to the Conservatives, that we no longer are making progress on our climate obligations. But I think you have to figure out a thing, and that is like a reason to believe.
Right. Okay. So there's quite possibly going to be a leadership race in the Liberal Party. And it's also quite possible that Liberals won't have a lot of time to make up their mind about who they're going to support, especially if they want to suit up and be active. Mm-hmm. So your research here was an attempt to arm people with some information that could help them make those decisions. What do you think Liberal activists should take away from this research?
I think, one, I assume this data will feel uncomfy to a lot of people, that and that's kind of an expectation and something that I weighed. I would challenge them to sit in it and think of okay, I would put myself in this category, kind of go like a little bit meta. So I'm in this category. I would vote Liberal no matter what. This is kind of how my cohort stacks up. And then to challenge yourself to think of these other people. And I'm being a little bit, I don't know, I feel like I'm condescending about this because these are our neighbors. Like, I don't think that these opinions aren't something that people have heard of before, but just challenging ourselves, I think, to put ourselves in that mindset of, okay, this is the environment, this is what people are caring about, this is what they're seeing, and then choosing from that place of kind of like, where is their demand? What is it that people are looking for? And our candidates are not made in a lab. If they were, I would say, oh, we should choose a woman from outside of politics with some type of financial chops. None of those people are.
Francis Donald, step right up.
I'll add her to the study 2.0. But that would be kind of the profile of when I look purely at demand. But again, does that person exist? Instead, you are not stuck with, but it looks like the choice will be people. It'll be between people who stack up on some of those attributes and another person who stacks up on some of the others. And so you're doing kind of a risk assessment. And then, of course, there's the things that are not in this study, which I think is really important, which is political chops. I tested the bio, and in the qualitative component, I did test videos of them to see what is their persona like, what do they seem like as a political talent. A lot of that is just hard to know. They've never been prime minister before. They've never been the leader of a party. That has to be an expansive skill set. They are going to have to grow in that role. So who do you believe can do that? But also, a lot of it is it's brand, and it's like, who is this person as a brand, as a contrast to Pierre Poilievre, and finding that calculation of like, I think that this is wise or this makes sense to me, and as a, your own little strategist, as opposed to just like you, the voter.
Right. And what's interesting name here seems to be Carney, in the sense that he's the person that we know the least about in terms of political chops, ability to do this job, ability to perform in those kinds of settings, rally crowds, motivate people. He's the only person we've never seen try to do any of that. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it seems that the idea of Mark Carney is the most compelling idea out there that we have.
Yeah, and I think, that will take, we're going to have to be so, if Mark Carney was selected, we're going to have to be so quick on our feet to brand him and position him, because he could be positioned as decency and gravitas and all of these things. Like, he could be the equivalent or far superior to Pierre Poilievre, what is assumed of him on the economy, but not an asshole. Or he'll be this globalist guy who is scary, who is going to do, X, Y, Z. And we're going to have to be, if it's him, fast out the gate. For any of the candidates, of course, fast out the gate and figuring out, planting a flag in the ground of exactly who this person is. But because he is such a blank slate, him in particular.
Right. There's nothing in here, though, that particularly throws terribly cold water on anybody's bid, with the perhaps exception of Mark Miller, who I don't really think sees himself as a candidate anyway. But everybody else in there can look at that and say that could all change in a week.
100%. Right. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think they have their own little lanes and their moment, or their places of strength. Right. One thing that was really interesting in looking at the whole population is who appealed to whom. So for Melanie Joly, very effective at bringing in men, especially younger men. Also, the front runner in Quebec, not by an enormous margin, but she is the front runner in Quebec. When we look in Atlantic Canada, obviously Dominic LeBlanc is in the mix. He isn't crushing, but he's in the top tier. What was so interesting, and I have no idea what to make of this or what is behind it, but Anita Anand does really well with women under 35. I called them in the article an stams, which is like they weirdly like her a lot. And I don't know if that's like a COVID thing, if they know anything about her. I don't know what's behind it from the bio, exactly what they're picking up on, but she tested really well with young women. I think, yeah, there are paths, but it's figuring that out. And obviously there's a whole organizational part, which is completely different and entirely impossible to test in polling. But that's a huge part of it as well. But I think everyone has they're successful politicians. They have their own brands. They've figured this out to a certain extent. It's just on a larger scale and as with a huge point of contrast.
Great. All right. Thank you, Kyla, for educating Herle Burlyites, especially liberal Herle Burlyites, but I suspect the other parties have some interest in this data as well, maybe looking at it preemptively for some other reasons. Anyway, it's great service. Thank you for doing it. This kind of information is invaluable and party members almost never have it. So great to do. Thank you for coming on the show and talking about it. So great to connect with you again. I miss you.
I miss you. It's so great to be on. I was joking with my friends that all you have to do to get on the Herle Burly is sell David the second half of your 20s, and but also the full report is linked in the show notes. It's in my newsletter.
Available on the Quotes website.
Yeah, it goes on into a lot more detail on some of these really important decision points.
Yeah, get the full report and dig into the details, right? Philip Fournier, I'm looking forward to your take. All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. And I'd also like to thank all of you Herle Burlyites who watched or listened to the show. And of course, my good friend, Kyla Ronellenfitsch. We'll see you all soon. Take care of yourselves.